What are the NFC East depth chart updates you need to know after free agency related to fantasy football? It's time to break it down right here, right now, as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com. NFL free agency finally coming to a slowdown here after a busy week and a half of moves. Sounds good for a lot of teams here, and we still have that big trade to go down. Aaron Rodgers from the Packers to the Jets at some point. We'll see what happens with Lamar Jackson. Those are the last two pieces of unfinished business we have. But a lot of moves have been made, and we can kind of see the dust settle and everything clear up here for a lot of teams as they try to rebuild or reload their rosters for the 2023 season. What we're going to do is give you important depth chart updates. We're going to go division by division here. We'll go NFC East, and we'll go all the way to the West, and then we'll do that with the AFC as well. But following 2 weeks here to get you caught up on what these teams are looking like here ahead of the 2023 NFL Draft and what unfinished business they have. So today we're going to look at the four teams from the NFC East. That would be the Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles, and Washington Commanders. So we're going to look at what they're looking like now on the offensive side, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, as well as their offensive lines in flux here as well. So a lot to get to in the show. We'll get into it in a moment. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Make sure you subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. All right, it is time to dive into the show here and look at the Dallas Cowboys. We'll start with them. It's always a good place to start as they're trying to become more competitive and more explosive here. Brian Schottenheimer takes over from Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. Dak Prescott, we know he's locked into his long-term deal here. It looks like he might get a restructure and an extension again from Jerry Jones soon. But the key thing they did was re-sign Cooper Rush. So Cooper Rush is behind Prescott. He played very well. We know filling in for Prescott last year, winning all but the game against the Eagles when he filled in. And that was a big reason why the Cowboys were able to still get in the playoffs with Dak needing a little bit more time to get healthy. So Cooper Rush has been outstanding here as the number two, so that's an important thing here for the Cowboys going forward because at least Rush, he facilitated things. He wasn't exactly lighting things up in the passing game, but he was helping the running game, getting the ball in the hands of the key receivers. So now if something happens to Dak again, they can trust Rush in that particular role. All right, and running back, this is where the big change comes in. Ezekiel Elliott cut for salary cap purposes. So he's not in the mix anymore. Tony Pollard gets the franchise tag. 1 year, $10.09 million is the tender here for Pollard. So he's looking good to be the lead back at this very moment. Doesn't seem like the Cowboys are too interested yet in Bijan Robinson of Texas or Jahmyr Gibbs of Alabama in that first round. They got other needs they got addressed. They made the two pretty significant moves here via trade, and they added Stephon Gilmore to their secondary. The other was getting Brandon Cooks for the receiving corps, but Elliott had to be a cap casualty related to that. So with Tony Pollard, behind him is Malik Davis. They just brought back Rico Dowdle. So this is your depth chart. So it's definitely open for the Cowboys to add another back. It would make sense with Pollard being a good change of pace and receiving back. They would look for maybe a power back, complementary there in the draft. Because Davis and Dowdle are just guys here. The big drop-off from Elliott that you could trust in pass protection and just really his veteran presence finishing in the red zone. So it's going to be flipped here where Pollard is now the seasoned guy leading this backfield. So Ford with the more explosive change of pace guy and filled in behind with the power guy. So much like we see in New Orleans with Alvin Kamara, now Jamal Williams in the mix. It used to be Mark Ingram. So sometimes you put the receiving guy forward here and make him the lead back with the key touches, and then have a complementary power back for those goal line short yardage situations. So I think that's still in play for the Cowboys in the draft, and a variety of options they can look at, but I don't think they'll use a high pick here. So Tony Pollard's still safe here as a pretty strong RB1, no matter what the Cowboys do in the draft, as long as they don't get Robinson or Gibbs. Gibbs would not make as much sense because he's a pretty good pass catcher, a little bit like Pollard, but they don't get Robinson, you can feel really great about Pollard as an RB1. All right, and wide receiver CeeDee Lamb is your alpha, coming off a big year. He's established as one of the best fantasy assets in the league now. Let's put it all together. His hands, his routes, his scoring. He's just a very talented receiver, and I think he could have his biggest year yet here as a primary target. Brandon Cooks comes in. He was the other guy, Stephon Gilmore, they traded for, so Cooks stays in the state of Texas, goes from Houston to Dallas. That's a record for how many times a player can be traded. So Cooks, we know he's a guy for hire. You can put him in anywhere. This gives them route versatility with CeeDee Lamb, where you have Cooks, he can play inside and outside. Lamb also is valuable in the slot. They needed that here because Michael Gallup is strictly an outside speed receiver with his verticality. So when you look at that, I think Cooks was a fine addition here. They wanted somebody that had Amari Cooper experience mode. They said bye to Noah Brown. They didn't get the returns they were looking for from Jalen Tolbert last year, so he's right in the depth chart behind Simi Fuyoko, who's the fourth wide receiver, and Kavontae Turpin, who you know from his explosive return game breakout last year. He's on the list as the number 6 wide receiver for the Cowboys at this very moment. So they need Cooks, that veteran presence again, that route running, be able to get open. They liked it when they had Lamb and Cooper, so kind of a way to replace Cooper. Delayed response here to do that, but they needed that player because, again, Gallup not reliable. There's durability at this stage. Fuyoko and Tolbert are still young and developing, and Turpin, again, is a return guy strictly there. All right, let's go to tight end, where they moved on from Dalton Schultz, and it made a lot of sense. Jake Ferguson was really coming on last year. Peyton Hendershot made some plays as well, so they felt comfortable with the combination of Ferguson and Hendershot. They can move on from Dalton Schultz. He ends up in Houston, so Brandon Cooks going from Houston to Dallas. You've got Dalton Schultz going from Dallas to Houston here. So interesting moves there, but opens up an opportunity for Jake Ferguson in particular. Hendershot had his moments, but I think Ferguson is a more complete tight end out of Wisconsin. So I think that gave them a comfort level that they could get that same type of blocking and receiving production, maybe even a little bit better blocking here from Ferguson, but not lose too much. So you look at Brian Schottenheimer, his history is a little bit spotty with using tight ends, so that's my concern here, but it should really mean good things for this receiving core a little bit more, so I think you would see a bump up of usage of Lamb, Cooks. That's why they had to get him, and Gallup. So I'm not going to buy into Ferguson or Hendershot as a reliable option, sleeper option for tight end 1 or even a mid-tier tight end 2. I'm going to see it kind of develop a little bit if they want to trust the tight end as much. So Schottenheimer, it's going to be a filling out period for the personnel. And unfortunately, we don't have to tell more of the continuity there. So things are going to be up in the air. I think Mike McCarthy would like to use the tight end a little bit more. So watch out for that. But this committee approach here with these two guys can also cut into the value going forward. I'm not sure the Cowboys want to invest too much in tight end in the draft, knowing that they don't have a lot of need here. Like, they can get by with these two guys. So it may just be a position we don't trust as much without Schultz in there for fantasy production. All right, finally looking at the Cowboys and their offensive line, they did take a hit. One of their players, Connor McGovern, not to be confused with the Jets center, he's gone to the Bills in free agency. So otherwise, rather intact here. You have the Smiths there, Tyler, the young guy now ready to take over left tackle. You have Tyron Smith, their right tackle here. That's probably what you're going to look at as a combination. You got Zach Martin still doing his thing at right guard. You have Tyler Bionich. There's a pretty good center, but the loss of McGovern, they're going to figure out some option there to fill in left guard here. So Isaac Alarcon would be the replacement. So, yeah, the Cowboys, I think, are going to be in the market for upgrading that left guard spot. We've seen them move on from Leo Collins as well on the offensive line. So they need to make a change here, and I think you're looking at good possibility of drafting a guard to a start as a rookie. So there you have it. There's a look at the Cowboys depth chart right now as it stands coming out of free agency. What still might need to be done here in the 2023 NFL draft. We'll get into two more teams in our next segment. We'll look at the New York Giants and Philadelphia Eagles and their latest depth charts after free agency. It's a fine time of year in college basketball. We know that the tournament is heating up into the Sweet 16, and that is a great time to get in on FanDuel Sportsbook. Download it. It's America's #1 sportsbook because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. So it's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes to drained. And it's not just NCAA with the March Madness as we get into the Sweet 16 of the tournament, but you can also get in on the NBA action as well. Don't forget about that every night to go after it. There, spread, money line, total, wherever you're looking at, the player props, points, rebounds, assists, all available too. They have so many exclusive bets you can check out at FanDuel Sportsbook, like the 2x3, the 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. A lot of fun to get in on that action early in games. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, of the NFL, and one of our proud sponsors here on the Locked On Network. All right, it is time to continue the show and look at the latest NFC East depth charts. We got through the Dallas Cowboys. Now, let's see where the Giants and Eagles stand after free agency, essentially. Daniel Jones is back. We know he got a 4-year, $160 million deal to be the starting quarterback. Tyron Taylor returns as the backup, so some status quo there for Brian Dable and Mike Kafka. In the backfield, it's also the same that we've seen. Saquon Barkley getting the franchise tag. Matt Breida back, as well as Gary Brightwell. So no changes with those situations. Now, there is a change at wide receiver. Isaiah Hodgins is back, so he had a good year being a key target for Daniel Jones last year. Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard were both re-signed here. They've moved on from Kenny Golladay, but now your newcomer that could have a big impact, Paris Campbell, the former Colt, he's in there. So right now, the depth chart reads like this. It's Hodgins, Campbell, and Slayton. You have Wan'Dale Robinson sliding to 4th. He was the dynamic draft pick from Kentucky that we thought they would have big plans for here in year 2. He would stay healthy, but he's buried right there with the Sterling Shepard, who's a depth veteran at this point. And David Sills, the 5th, he rounds out the top 6 guys on the current Giants depth chart. But Hodgins really has an opportunity here. This is the way it's listed. We have to see what they do in the draft, of course, but Paris Campbell is a good versatile speed, quickness guy that they can put in the slot. You look at Darius Slayton, he's got good chemistry and big playability with Daniel Jones. I don't think they want to give that up. So it's interesting. I don't know if they'll force themselves into a wide receiver move after getting Campbell in free agency, but right now I just like the intrigue of those 3 receivers. Again, Jones had the early history with Slayton. Slayton kind of bailed them out last year when they were done and seemed to want to move on, and they bring him back here. And Hodgins was good. He just got open a lot there. So interesting that the Giants don't need to lock in here to getting a wide receiver in the draft. And they're definitely not going to lock into getting a tight end because they just made a trade for Darren Waller. So gave up a pick there that they got in the deal with the Chiefs for Kadarius Toney, the number 100 overall pick. So they used pretty good draft capital to get Darren Waller, put him with Daniel Bellinger. They have Nick Vannett, and of course Lawrence Cager, who had some moments last year. So I see some good depth at tight end. If Bellinger's healthy, Waller's healthy, you've got some options there. So that also could preclude the Giants from forcing themselves on a wide receiver here with Waller in the mix with Bellinger. So they have some 12 personnel potential here with Dable and Kafka. Pretty good depth at wide receiver now that Shepard and Slayton are back, and Robinson is in between them as the number 4 receiver. So there's a lot to be liked about this offense and reason to feel good about Daniel Jones, especially you've got the offensive line. They got to figure out a few things. They lost John Feliciano and Nick Gates, interior guys there. They're still some of the tackles, Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal. You got also Ben Bredesen, who's a pretty versatile. You can play him inside, so he'll probably start at one of the spots, probably center. And look at Mark Lewinsky. He's the former Colt. He's in the mix as well. So pretty darn good offensive line when you have Thomas and Neo, high draft capital, first-round picks here. So the Giants are looking in pretty good shape here to boost Daniel Jones and keep him as a nice fantasy value quarterback and maybe help him a little bit with the passing numbers on top of the floor that you get with his rushing production. All right, Philadelphia. We know there were some changes there for the Eagles based on the free agent dilemma they were in. They want to bring back a few core veterans to continue to push for a Super Bowl championship here with Jalen Hurts and trying to take advantage of one more year before he gets paid big time. They can at least defer the big hit on the cap for next year. So they wanted to go for it, but they also had to be careful about their spending. So definitely took some offensive hits there. Jalen Hurts is, of course, your starting quarterback. Marcus Mariota is the new backup, replacing Gardner Minshew. He signs with the Colts. So Minshew follows Shane Steichen, the former Eagles offense coordinator there, who's the head coach in Indianapolis. And Ian Book returns, the former Saints draft pick out of Notre Dame. He is now the number 3 guy project. So they wanted maybe a little bit more of a mobile backup that fit in the offense. You could plug and play more so than Minshew. And I think Mariota does that for sure. So they're embracing the Hurts style of play even more so at quarterback with the mobility. And Book also is a pretty good athlete as their third stringer. All right, running back, the big change. Miles Sanders is gone. He's signed a free agent deal in Carolina, so he joins the Panthers. They replaced him before they lost Sanders with Rashaad Penny, the oft-injured Seattle Seahawks first-round pick there. So maybe looking for a little bit more explosiveness out of that lead back. We know that Penny can eat chunks of yardage behind a very good offensive line. He's a 5-yard per carry type guy if he can stay healthy here. So they're taking a shot on him over Miles Sanders, who's had his own share of durability issues. So interesting pickup here. I have a theory on why it's Rashaad Penny and not an other option here at running back with all those potential starters with a little bit more durability. They did bring back Boston Scott for some power back, swing backup versatility and insurance there. Kenneth Gainwell's in the mix, and of course Trey Sermon still around, the former 49ers. A high draft pick they thought would be a lead back there. So you look at Penny, Scott, Gainwell, and Sermon. What this tells me is they're making a serious push to get Bijan Robinson in the first round. So Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs as well available. The Eagles have been attached to both of these backs. They're picking penultimately in the first round ahead of the Chiefs. So it would make sense that they could target one of these backs. One of them would slip a little bit with their draft value. So when you're looking at overall, you're looking at a good situation developing here for one of those rookie backs to be very fruitful and productive. And we know what happened in Seattle with Rashaad Penny last year. They drafted Kenneth Walker the third. You saw Walker explode as a big fantasy football asset once he got the starting job, and Penny went down with injury again. It was awesome to see Walker down the stretch. So very much history could repeat itself here with a rookie running back, Robinson or Gibbs, leading with Penny being kind of the insurance, and maybe they end up cutting Trey Sermon out of this mix. All right, let's go to wide receiver. Pretty easy there. It's the same group. You've got A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Quez Watkins, Britton Covey, Greg Ward, Devin Allen. So not much depth behind those top two, Watkins being the big play threat as the number 3, but they also use a lot of 12 personnel. So really not much to see there, not much to do there for the Eagles. Looking at tight end, it's Dallas Goedert and Jack Stoll and Grant Calcaterra. Pretty good depth there as well. Goddard in a really good position to keep producing big time here in fantasy football. They did take one hit on their elite offensive line. Jordan Mailata is back and left tackle. You got Jason Kelsey coming back for one more year. You got Landon Dickerson there at left guard. And, of course, the venerable Lane Johnson at right tackle. So they lose Isaac Samalo, though. He leaves, stays in the state of Pennsylvania, goes to the Steelers. So they got to replace left guard here. They've got some options. They elevate Cam Jurgens into that role, who profiles as a center, and he was a contingency here for Kelsey retiring. So a lot of things to watch out for. But when you look at Eagles, they're pretty much intact, except you have Penny coming in instead of Sanders, and then we'll see if that sets it up for Robinson or Gibbs in the 2023 draft. Now, we have one more team to talk about in this division. We'll get to them in the final segment, the Washington Commanders. They've had a busy free agent period, so some changes of significance there. We know we talked about the NCAA tournament being hot here, March Madness, Sweet 16, all that good stuff. Well, it is also Built Bar Madness this March. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar puff, and now it's your time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know, I'll be voting for the churro bar and puff here. That's what I want to win. It's such a delicious flavor. And if you want your favorite team to win, you got to also pick your favorite built or puff. You got to support it just like that. So support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built. And especially with that great deal coming up, Built, the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing, you won't think they're good for you. What makes Built bars and puffs so good? Well, for starters, they're all high protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. So run to builtmarchmadness.com right now. Vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. All right, it is time to close the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football and break down the Washington Commanders' depth chart changes after free agency. They're pretty locked into Sam Howell as their starting quarterback for now, but they move on from Carson Wentz. They cut him. They didn't re-sign Taylor Heineke. He ends up with the Falcons. Wentz is still out there available. So Sam Howell, they're trusting in him. They want to good look at this North Carolina second-year quarterback, see what he can do, but they're not going to be totally operating without a net. They do have Jacoby Brissett, and they did sign him away from the Browns. So Brissett will go in from Miami to Cleveland. He's now in Washington. Jacoby Brissett becoming a Ryan Fitzpatrick type here, or Tyrod Taylor, just going from team to team here, backing up the system versatility, the knowledge, the execution. It's all there. So pretty good contingency plan here for Sam Howell to have Jacoby Brissett coming off a very strong season when he started those 11 games while Deshaun Watson was suspended for the Browns. I thought he played very well, facilitated the receivers, and maybe we're rooting secretly or maybe more openly that we want Brissett to win this job out of the gate because we're not sure what to get from Sam Howell. At least we know last year Taylor Heineke did get the ball in the hands of the key playmakers here for fantasy production. Carson Wentz struggled to do so, so we're always going to look at the guy that's going to facilitate. If individually they're not going to put up pleasing fantasy football numbers to start at quarterback alone, we want them to help our other guys put up numbers. I think Brissett is perfect to do that. Sam Howell a little bit more nervous about that. And running back, pretty much you know what it is. Brian Robinson is taking over for Antonio Gibson, but Gibson they still like, and so it can be productive here. It's a new offensive coordinator, so really refreshes here with Eric Bieniemy, a former running back in Colorado. So he's going to be very in tune to this group and maybe open up the competition. But right now, I would give the lead to Robinson, who's more the Isaiah Pacheco in this group, where you have Antonio Gibson might be more of the Jerick McKinnon. I'm not going to say it's going to play out exactly like that, but that could be the philosophy of Bieniemy, copycatting from what they had in Kansas City and trying to apply that in Washington. It rounds out here with Jared Patterson and Jonathan Williams, two guys that have been hanging on as backups. We'll see if they draft a particular back here that Bieniemy feels a little bit more comfortable with the skill set. We'll see how that plays out. But right now, I would say Robinson over Gibson is your best bet to be the leader and the key touches for the Commanders at running back. The wide receiver, you know how it plays out with Terry McLaurin as your number one, Jahan Dotson is your rising number two outside going into year two. Curtis Samuel, good versatile slot there is number three. Behind him is a dynamic Diami Brown, a big play threat, but not too much else so far. But he did go to North Carolina, so there's a little bit of connection there with the Sam Howell offense. So something to think about there. And Dax Milne and Kyrick McGowan round out the limited depth chart here for the Commanders. But pretty good number 1, 2, 3 grouping there with McLaurin, Dotson, and Samuel and Brown making occasional big plays. I'm not, again, tying those into the quarterback to go after and say, okay, the quarterback is going to add up to QB1 here, but what the more competent quarterback to get the ball to the principal playmakers. And right now, I feel a little bit more comfortable with that with Brissett versus Howell. The tight end, also not too much there that has changed. Logan Thomas with John Bates being the backup and Cole Turner, their young guy, still in development here as a third stringer there. Logan Thomas has got to stay healthy. This will make a break here, I think, for him in the NFL to really see if he can continue to play here. And we'll see how it plays out there. But Logan Thomas might have a little bit more value actually if Sam Howell started, his young quarterback, tight end security blanket. And I think it would pivot there a little bit more, but Brissett would open up and unlock those receivers a little bit more. McLaurin, Dotson, Samuel. The offensive line has seen very nice upgrades here. Charles Leno Jr. played really well at left tackle. He's kind of shored that up ever since they lost Trent Williams. They've been looking for different guys, Jerron, Christian, and others, but definitely Charles Leno has really held that left tackle job well. Andrew Norwell was a good addition to rebound from losing Brandon Sheriff to the Jaguars last year. You have Nick Gates. He's a newcomer. He's going to play center here. They needed to replace Wes Schweitzer, who left in free agency. And Sam Cosmi was drafted to play tackle, but is kind of settled in at right guard. And now you have a new starter at right tackle following the enemy from Kansas City to Washington is Andrew Wiley. So two good updates there in Gates and Wiley to upgrade this offensive line. So they went to work here for sure. The Commanders are trying to have a new look to their offense completely with the enemy taking over. So again, we're hopeful that Brissett is going to be the facilitator for all this early in the season. If Howell shows some flashes and we'll feel comfortable there and where he builds his chemistry, then we're going to be okay there. But right now, fantasy will always lean to the veteran when we're looking for that help for our playmakers, offensive skill players. The Commanders do have plenty of those, and interested to see how they'll operate in this offense as they pivot away from what they had with Scott Turner under Ron Rivera. All right. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Every day we'll have a depth chart here update for you on the teams from the NFC North on our next show. So we'll continue that and look at the four teams there. So look at the Bears, a great offseason for them so far, as well as the Lions, and the Packers and Vikings, not so much. But we'll catch you up on what's going on with those four teams on our next show. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes from free agency to the draft. Salary cap manager more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL with the Draft Dudes Scouting show wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back next time to break down the NFC North depth charts.